In a powerful speech yesterday, Ukraine's president vowed his country will not give up and will not lose its war with Russian invaders. Ukraine's emergency services shared this video overnight of people being pulled from the rubble of a destroyed house in the city of Sumy. As thousands of Ukrainians flee the fighting, Vice President Kamala Harris is scheduled to be in Warsaw today to show solidarity with America's NATO allies. We are joined now from Germany by retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges. He was the commanding general of the U.S. Army in Europe between 2014 and 2017. General, it's good to see you again.
Thanks, Vlad.
So let me ask you, I think something that we touched upon yesterday, the entire world is watching the fifth largest military in the world fighting Ukrainians who are armed nothing with less than Stinger missiles and javelins, nothing near what the Russians bring to the table. And yet they're stymieing the Russians on the streets. Give us a sense of the analysis of how the Ukrainians are able to do that.
Well, the Ukrainians have a never-ending resource called heart. A will to defend their own country, and the Russian invaders that are murdering innocent civilians don't have that. So that's the key difference right here is what Ukrainian soldiers and civilians, what they're doing versus what the Kremlin is sending into Ukraine.
So the notion, I guess, must have been that Putin thought this was going to be easy. He was going to march his troops in. There would be little resistance. He would install a puppet leader in Ukraine, and that would be the end of it. Did they not have a contingency plan for this type of urban warfare that we're seeing, where we see grandmothers making Molotov cocktails?
Yeah, it's a gross underestimation of the fighting spirit and the will to resist of Ukraine, and a gross overestimation of their own talents or their own capabilities. Russia began a modernization effort back in 2007, and they've invested a ton of money into it. But even in modern warfare, it's not just technology that makes a difference. It's who's using the technology. How is it being employed? And I don't think that the Russian armed forces have trained actually at the level and the rigor like you would get from U.S. military or from the British military or Canadian military to be able to effectively do all these things. And so the weaknesses are being revealed in terms of logistics, terrible maintenance, the fact that they don't have sergeants like we do that can enforce discipline. That's where we're seeing the difference. And so, of course, as a result of this, the Kremlin has changed their plan to a war of attrition, which means they're going to smash every town and city to create this terrible refugee flow, the weaponization of refugees, if you will, to put pressure on the Zelensky government and also on other European governments who now have more than 2 million Ukrainian refugees that they're taking care of in Poland and other Central and Eastern European countries.
General, you touched on the ground attack. I want to talk about the air attack. Yesterday, the Pentagon rejected an offer from Poland who said that they would give the U.S. fighter jets to provide to Ukraine. Was it right for them to turn down that offer for a shipment of fighter jets?
Nate, this is an excellent question and an excellent point. I don't think the book is closed on this yet.
Okay.
For sure, Ukraine needs the capabilities to be able to defend themselves. That's all they're asking for, actually. They're not asking for American troops. They're asking for the tools so they can defend themselves. Poland, I think, in a very good initiative, has said, okay, well, we can provide about a third of our Air Force for Ukraine because Ukrainian pilots would already know how to fly these particular aircraft. But, Poland understands Russia, and the idea of them uncovering themselves to give up a third of their own Air Force is not something that they can do without a lot of thought. And so the idea of backfilling their Air Force came about. So could the U.S. find F-16s, for example, somewhere else, whether from another country or of their own? I think the issue is in the actual mechanics of how this would happen. Poland said, hey, we'll hand them over to the U.S. We'll give them to you at Ramstein Air Force Base, our very important air base in Germany, and then let Ukrainians fly them into Poland. And I think this is it's not so simple as we just rejected it. There's a lot of considerations here of, U.S. aircraft in Germany going to Ukraine. The Russians will not distinguish necessarily all the nuances.
The mechanics of that, General,
transaction.
the mechanics as you're talking about it. And it's actually something that I wanted to ask you about quickly also, because you've signed a letter with other foreign policy experts talking about wanting to support a no-fly zone over human corridors. But that's also a mechanics or maybe the semantics of it. Why would that be distinguished as any different by Putin than another no-fly zone, especially because it seems like contact really could happen in that situation?
Yeah, Dana, you're exactly right. And I did sign that letter because I was so anxious. I am anxious to see us do something to stop the murder, the deliberate targeting of these innocent civilians. You know, we all will remember Srebrenica, July 1995, when 8,000 men and boys, Bosnians, were murdered by Republika Srpska forces while European soldiers under UN mandate stood by. And none of us wants to see that happen again. But it's not inconsequential. The idea that we would do something that ends up with force on force against Russian forces, for sure, NATO air forces would destroy them. But that's not the point. The point is, what are the implications for escalation? And keeping the alliance together is essential. So this could not be a U.S. alone. We'd have to get everybody in NATO to agree to it. I think most of the damage is actually being done by rockets and artillery and cruise missiles fired from the Black Sea Fleet. What can we do to help Ukrainians address the source of those missiles? It's not so much the Russian Air Force.
It's more on the ground, as you started discussing with Vlad. General Hodges, we appreciate the time and the information, the insight. Thank you.
Thanks for the privilege, guys.